Okay, I know I do this often, but let me just preface what I'm about to say by pointing out that whatever criticisms I have for youth ministry per se aren't by way of denouncing or even criticizing people who help to organize youth ministries or youth groups at all. I recognize that many people have been helped by such groups, and I don't want to take anything away from that. And I should also mention that this is a topic I've had on my mind for a while, but what pushed me to make a video about it now was a podcast that Trent Horn and Eric Sammons recorded recently on this very topic, which helped me understand my own reasons for feeling the way that I do about youth ministry. So, when I'm talking about youth ministry, I'm not talking about this or that youth group or youth event. I'm talking about this paradigm by which we've become convinced as a church that in order to reach young people, in order to transmit the faith to them, we have to supplement the routine habits and expressions of the church with something that will be more culturally appealing to the youth. And if I had to summarize my thesis, which I intend to elaborate on, obviously, I'd say this. If the church was operating the way it should and the way it very easily could with the right kind of vision and leadership, then youth ministry, as it's popularly conceived of, would be at best a redundant curiosity. And I'm confident in that assessment because I've been on both sides of this question. When I first became Catholic as a young man, a young adult, I was immediately recruited as the electric guitarist for the Life Teen Mass in the parish I joined. I then volunteered for youth rallies, for conferences, and eventually I led praise and worship style music for years at a Mass that was something of a destination for people because in part of the music. And now today, as a father, my family attends the traditional Latin Mass with periodic excursions back to the Novus Ordo at our local parish. And a large part of the reason we attend the Latin Mass is because of our kids, both because we recognize that they have the best chance of retaining a strong and vibrant faith as they age into adulthood, and just simply because they insist upon it. After the first few times that we attended the Latin Mass, mostly as an experiment, while my wife and I were still kind of unsure if this was the best fit for our family, we spontaneously surveyed the kids on the way to Mass one day and asked them if they'd rather go back to the parish we were familiar with or continue going to this new Latin Mass, which I was a bit reluctant to ask them because I was afraid they were going to say that we should go back to the old parish. But instead, this isn't exaggerated at all, they literally cheered with hands and fists raised triumphantly from the back of our passenger van saying, "Latin Mass." And I will have done my job poorly if you misunderstand me for trying to make this video about the Novus Ordo versus the Latin Mass. I don't share that anecdote to try to establish the superiority of the Latin Mass over the Novus Ordo or anything like that. That's not the topic of this video. Just that our Latin Mass parish doesn't rely on the youth ministry model to attract youth, although it does attract youth, whereas our old parish invests a lot of money and resources into that model. And I've witnessed a sharp contrast between the former being able to draw interest and affections from our kids, and the latter being almost entirely incapable of doing so. And I hope that wherever you land on this question, whether you agree with me or not, I hope you will agree that this is an important conversation to have because as it stands, some stats claim that numbers as high as 9 out of 10 baptized youth end up leaving the church by the time that they're adults, I'm sorry, that's an inexcusable number, and one I'm not willing to risk the souls of my children on. So for me, this isn't about liturgy wars or the Novus Ordo versus the TLM. This is about ensuring that our kids have the best possible chance at knowing and loving God well into their adult lives and not unnecessarily repelling them away from the church. That's what motivates me to ask this question and to do my best to answer it in what I believe is a reasonable, logical way. And it's what motivates me to look past the risk of offending someone by raising these concerns, because feeling good about ourselves and our activities should take a back seat to the very real and sobering reality of how catastrophic the church's obligations are being neglected right now. So let me try to do a little better job of defining what it is that I mean by youth ministry. So I would say that it's this idea that the church's normal expressions of piety and worship, especially in the Mass, are insufficient at inspiring the interest and affections of the youth. So out of an either implicit or explicit recognition of that fact, we need to provide supplemental forms of church-based activities and gatherings for them to make them feel more connected and more drawn to the faith. And what primarily distinguishes these activities from typical Catholic parish culture is that it draws inspiration from popular youth culture. We look at the landscape of whatever's trending on TikTok, or in my day it was MTV, and we say we need more of that if we're going to keep the interest of our youth in the church. So what I mean by youth ministry isn't so much events for the youth. I think that's fine. We need to have like catechetical programs for youth, events for youth, camps for youth. I think those things are great and needed. When I say youth ministry, I mean this attempt at artificially importing secular youth culture into the church and trying to use that as a mortar for community and piety. Referring back to that podcast that Trent Horn and Eric Sammons published, Trent asked a question that challenged Eric to be more consistent on this question when he said, we can all agree there's nothing wrong with like having a men's ministry or a men's group in a parish. So what's wrong with a youth group? And I would agree that having a men's group is a fine thing to have in a parish. But imagine if in that men's group there was like a men's pastor who rode into the meeting on a motorcycle, chewing tobacco and wearing construction overalls, and then said, "Okay, boys, today we're having an arm wrestling competition." Obviously, that would be ridiculous, but I feel like something like that is what informs our approach to youth ministry. Because if we did feel the need to create an almost comically stereotypical masculine atmosphere to make men feel more at home in the church, what would we be admitting by doing something like that? We'd be admitting that the church's normal expression of her own culture is critically lacking in qualities that draw a masculine heart. So we need to supplement that to make up for that deficiency. It's like someone on a vegan diet who needs to take iron and protein supplements. I think something like that is implicitly going on with youth ministry. We recognize that the church lacks compelling culture, and so we try to supplement it with whatever appeals to them in the secular culture, and the results are often incoherent as well as cringeworthy. Incoherent because pop culture is actually the commodification of culture. It's manufactured culture refined for its most profitable potential. It's become a consumer product. And the thing about consumer products is that they appeal to the individual, not the group. Consumerism isn't about drawing people together in community. It's about giving each individual exactly what appeals most to their personal tastes and preferences. It's the embodiment of individualism. And this is absolutely true of pop culture. When I was a teenager, you had people forming identities around the consumer offerings of the pop culture industrial complex. Some people were into certain sports, others different sports or no sports at all. Some people were into like rap music or metal music. Some were into electronic dance music or pop. There was and still is an endless supply of offerings that produce rival currents of culture within society rather than a single shared culture, which is why pop culture is actually anti-culture. It's not some new alternative version of culture. It's the antithesis of true culture. It used to be that an elderly grandfather, a middle-aged person, and like a school-aged child could all gather around a piano or a fiddle after dinner and sing folk songs that they would all know and enjoy together because their culture was one and the same. That's just a simple example of how true culture binds people together in community, which is a huge part of its purpose. But pop culture does the opposite. For-profit pop culture divides us by individual taste and identity segregation, which is what it promotes. That's why every generation is mystified by the upcoming younger generation. We've allowed robber barons to throw away our traditional cultures for an alternative that fills their pockets with money and fails to benefit the communal nature of society. It divides us by concepts as stupid and arbitrary as something like brand loyalty, which is great for them, but toxic for society as it needlessly creates division. And of course, pop culture maximizes the kind of segregation between age groups because consumer marketing works best on vulnerable and inexperienced minds. So Therefore, it preys upon the youth. That's why most of the aggressive advertising is aimed at the youth, and why pop culture trends are most easily bought into by the youth. The reason we've become a society of constantly shifting trends, which didn't used to exist, by the way, I know it's easy to assume that it did, but this is a modern phenomenon, is because obsolescence maximizes profits. So if the pair of pants you got 2 years ago is still in good condition, still perfectly good pants, you might not want to needlessly spend money on new ones. That is, unless we arbitrarily create a new fashion trend that says the fit of your old pants is now out of style and embarrassing to wear. So you have to get new ones if you're going to keep up and be a part of the community. So how can we use a model of culture that is based on maximizing profits and promoting individuality as the means of drawing people together in community and in love of God? My answer is we simply can't. It might have, outbursts of success here and there, but it will mostly fail and at the cost of replacing a kind of church culture that would be effective. So that's how the pop culture as youth ministry model is incoherent and incompatible with the aims of youth ministry. But I also said it can be extremely cringeworthy, and that's definitely true because pop culture as a model for culture only works if you have the resources of an industrial complex behind it. And the reason is because it requires a lot of material to make a hit song or a hit movie. Think about how many bands, how many performers, how many records, how many movies and actors are cranking out content every month, and the vast majority of which is terrible. That's how much content they have to put out to produce a Taylor Swift or a Billie Eilish. Most of it is terrible because the medium has so little merit behind it, because what's cool or what's hip is so ill-defined and amorphous that even the manufacturers of it don't have a recipe for what makes it successful. So they have to just throw endless amounts of garbage at the wall in the hopes that something will bring enough profit to make it all worthwhile, which is a model that the church simply can't use. We don't have the resources, and we would do way more harm than good with our many failed attempts at producing some kind of appealing or cool synthesis of faith and culture. Most of our attempts would be cringe, and if we're being honest, most just are. Even the well-performing youth groups that I helped out at featured a lot of kids who were there only because their parents forced them to be there. It usually only had appeal for kids who simply weren't cool and didn't know the difference. God bless them. Which, if we're trying to be cool, that's only a confirmation of failure on our part. So what's the solution? What does work? I would say authentic, beautiful, transcendent Catholic culture. Sacredness should be our unique mode of appeal because it's attractive to people of goodwill, and the secular culture can't compete with it. Like I said, my family attends the Latin Mass. We have a platoon of altar boys who love what they do and who take it so seriously. And watching them every week is no wonder why their peers are drawn to join as well. It's inspiring. They're disciplined, they're pious, they're dignified, and they're exceptional in everything that they do on the altar and in the sanctuary. Where else could you go to see boys and teens perform a function like that out of their own enthusiasm? After Mass, we often have socials. There's a park across the street where families always gather for picnics. Kids play games, sports, or just sit around and visit. And the culture and community is incredibly rich. There's no shortage of integration for the youth into this church culture, which is a big reason why my kids immediately became attached to it when we started attending. It's simply a natural effect of authentic Christian culture that is far more elusive than it should be for a typical Catholic parish, and could easily be implemented anywhere. Make liturgy sacred again. Give inspiring homilies grounded in the word of Scripture and tradition rather than therapeutic spirituality. That's what galvanizes the community together so that we have no need of supplements. It's a spiritual diet that satisfies, and the kind of events that are more youth-oriented just happen organically rather than through paid staff who are doing it out of obligation. And here's the key in all of this. In my parish, we're seeing young people grow up and become models of the faith. They're going off to seminaries, or many are talking about going off to the convent, or they're going off to renowned Catholic colleges, among the few that are left, admittedly. At our old parish, which places a high premium on youth ministry as the model, the stats are probably much closer to the 1 in 10 who actually continue practicing the faith in adulthood. And that alone is enough to convince me. You can set aside all the arguments I'm using here, all the speculation and all the reasoning. When 9 out of 10 youth end up leaving as soon as they're given that freedom, we have to admit that our current model is a disastrous shipwreck. And the people who protest the hardest about having these kinds of self-critical conversations is a pretty strong indication that they're more motivated by self-interest than the good of our youth. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying you need the Latin Mass to make this possible. I'm just saying that we need Catholic culture that is true and incarnational of our creed, not an attempt to smuggle in an incompatible and individualist for-profit culture as a substitute. My kids often organize their own events, retreats, reading clubs, barn dances, outdoor excursions, you name it. And when we get together as families, as we often do, there's no segregation by age. Everyone integrates and interacts joyfully. Without that kind of authentic culture and community, yes, we will find a need for youth ministry because we're trying to sustain ourselves on a poor diet. My answer is, let's start building authentic Catholic culture based on our own tradition, our own folk songs, our own hymns, our own liturgy that isn't trying to entertain and amuse, but to sanctify. As Pope Benedict said, holiness is always in season because it isn't based on some fleeting trend. Traditional culture is classical. It never goes out of style because it was never dependent on being in style for what makes it appealing. Okay, thanks for watching that. I hope that was a blessing to you, that it encouraged you and edified you in your journey with the Lord. And if it did, and if you want to support the work that we're doing as a result, which thank you so much for considering that because we really do need your help to make this viable. Then there's a few ways you can do that. You can go to brianholdsworth.ca/help, which is obviously my website. And there's some options there. One is to just contribute through my website. The other would be to join us over on Locals, where you can interact with me and other like-minded people. You can gain access to exclusive content where we're doing live streams and I'm uploading videos and things like that. But we're also doing a secret philosophy study with a secret philosopher academic who's joining us once a month to take us through difficult texts that we want to read on our own, but we need some clarification and some guidance on that. So right now we're working through some works by St. Thomas Aquinas with him, and he's a Thomistic philosopher. So if that's interesting to you, join me on brianholdsworth.locals.com. And again, you can check out my website at brianholdsworth.ca/help.